Okay, how about a non-security talk? Is that weird? It is slightly weird. So I've actually done this talk a couple of times before, and it is sort of a soft skill talk. It's more about career stuff. And I've honestly been really, really surprised at how many people like it, not because I thought it was a bad talk, but because I'm just surprised that so many of us come here and we do like tech stuff, and then a lot of people are actually interested in some softer skill stuff too. So look, I hope you enjoy this, and a lot of this talk is about my experiences going from my previous job in a company called Pfizer through to what I do now. Now, many of you have probably used Pfizer products, but in case you don't know who they are, they make this. And I'm not saying you use this one per se. They make a lot of different things. They make things like Lipitor for cholesterol, Zoloft for depression. And look, I think a lot of people think that working for a company like Pfizer, the makers of Viagra, would be a lot of fun. And there were aspects of it which were enjoyable. I spent 14 years in the company at total, so I couldn't have been too dramatically bad. But one of the things I found as I was there, and I think a lot of you probably find this in your careers as well, is that you might be good at what you do. Say you're a developer. I went in as a developer. And they said, oh, you're quite a good developer. You should stop doing that and become a manager, because that's what you've got to do to progress your career. And I kind of didn't really like that because I like building stuff, but I also want to feel like I have a career and I can go somewhere as well. And around about 2009, I decided to start writing a blog. And this was the first blog post I ever wrote. And I want to sort of explain why I wrote this. The title you can see here, Why Online Identities Are Smart Career Moves. I felt that when I was interviewing people for roles and I couldn't find anything about them anywhere, it just felt a little bit suspect. Like they'd give you a CV, and you wouldn't believe it, but every CV said they were awesome. True story. And they'd give you references, and you'd speak to the references, and the references would go, this person's awesome. I was like, well, that's why they chose you to be the reference. This is the whole point. And there was like no independent verification of what this person stood for, what they'd done. And my theory at the time, very first blog post I ever wrote, I said, I reckon one of the best ways to make yourself more marketable as a developer is to have an active online profile. Because I'd like to be able to find information that backed up the claims that you were making. And I went on and said, look, I reckon if you can demonstrate that over time you've been actively involved in the areas that your CV is saying you're so fantastic about, I reckon that's a good thing. Because someone else is going to look at that and go, well, actually, yeah, the CV matches the evidence. I wasn't wanting to change my job at the time. Here's exactly what I said. I said, look, at the time I enjoyed it. I was getting a little bit disenfranchised with not doing a lot of dev stuff anymore, but hey, we worked in a fun place. It wasn't too bad. And I made the comment that I don't know if at some point in time they're not going to want me or I'm not going to want to be there. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, and I can't just suddenly decide to do something at the time when I'm unhappy. And as it turns out, it took 5 years after this before I was very unhappy, and another year after that before I was gone. So with the benefit of hindsight, that was a pretty good time to actually start writing this blog and going down the path that I'm going to talk about here. So the place I worked was part of Sydney. It's in the western side of Sydney called West Ryde. And this was our plant, so we had a manufacturing plant there. And I worked in this office down here. And my particular office was all the way down the bottom, just down here, in the basement, without any windows, because I'm a tech person. Why do I need windows? Right? Now, my manager had windows. And the reason he had windows is because he was a manager, had to have windows. He was never there, he was always travelling. But you've got to have windows, there's a hierarchy. And if he didn't have windows, it wouldn't represent his status within the organisation. And a lot of companies are like this. They're not sort of merit-based, who actually needs natural light because they're actually in the place. It's like, what is reflective of your status? I don't know, maybe I had a bit of a window issue. Today, I often work from a place that doesn't have any windows at all. And this is literally where I frequently worked from. There's a place called South Australia. It's an island near us. And I get on my jet ski and I put my laptop in there and I go down to the island. It's about 25 minutes away, which is about the same amount of time I spent sitting in traffic in Sydney. And I go down here. My colleagues are very often smarter than some of the ones I had before. They don't say a lot, which is good. Maybe why they seem smarter. And then I go home to my wife. I ride the jet ski home. It's all very exciting. And this is what it's often like. And the truth is, this is very, very close to what it's like. So I'm very often out here on the jet ski. And one thing you'll notice about jet ski, everyone on a jet ski is always happy. Google it. It's a true story. So I ride the jet ski home, and I ride down our street. This is the street we live on. I know it looks different. Well, actually, the streets here are normally wet too, aren't they? Anyway, so we ride down here, and we go down to the back of the house. So this is where we live today. And behind the gangplank there, you can see there's a little door, and there's a winch that comes out with the trolley, and you put the jet ski on, and it goes back inside there. And this is literally what life looks like today. And what I really want to talk about is how that transition happened and how we have the choices to live like this today. And I'm really conscious that when I do a talk like this, or when I take photos, when I tweet, do things like that, there is this propensity for things to come across the wrong way. You can look like a dick, right? And I think each of us are wired differently. Some people find this really abrasive, and other people are like, okay, this is cool, and maybe it's a bit inspirational or a bit exciting. And what I'd sort of encourage you to do over this talk is sort of think less about this side of things and more about what you're going to do for yourselves. Because this is to try and give you ideas about how you can progress and go to other places that you might want to go. And it's not always necessarily going to be about money or toys or things like that. But try and keep this in mind. What opportunities are you going to make? Because all of these things have only come from things I've done that have actually opened up doors. Now, all of us are motivated by different things. And you know, as an example, many people are motivated by money. That's probably the reason we go to work in the first place. You know, if it was like I could do anything I want, would you be doing exactly what you're doing now? I certainly wouldn't have been before. So this is important to a lot of people. A lot of people just have jobs that aren't real good. It's kind of what it felt like very often. I don't want to be here. This is not my fun anymore. For a lot of people too, it's just about having more flexibility with family. So a lot of people genuinely just want to spend more time with their family. A lot of people I know are very happy to finish at 5 o'clock, go home, play with the kids, cook dinner, do all that sort of thing, go back to work at 9. That's fine. We've all got different motivations, different things that are important to us. But I want to sort of talk about how I made that transition. And one of the first things I did was that blog. That was really the start of it. And what I'd suggest is that if you're thinking about starting to have more of an online persona and more publicity, is to actually talk to your boss about it and say, hey, look, I've got this idea. I want to start writing a blog. And I want to talk to you for a while about why this was such a good thing, not just for what I do, but why I think it's a good thing for everyone. When you write a blog, it helps you do your job better. And I'm going to give you a few examples of this. The first thing that sort of really struck me, and that one of the factors that drove me towards writing the blog, is that every time I did anything in my professional capacity and I got feedback from my colleagues or my boss or others around me, they were always very nice. And that kind of sounds like a good thing, but what I was finding is that it was filtered. I wasn't always getting candid feedback, and part of it was the difficulty I had is we didn't have a lot of technical people around us. I was the technical person. There were other people that were more involved in the business side of things, other people that might be IT pros. I was like the dev guy. And they very frequently didn't understand what I do. And in my little world of the things I did, I was the smartest guy in the room. And that's not a positive place to be. You don't grow and learn a lot when there aren't other people around pushing you. So I was always getting this feedback. They're like, well, you're proposing doing jQuery 2 with Angular on Cold Fusion. This sounds fantastic. Good job. Let's do it. You didn't understand any of that, did you? And this is often the way it was. Now, when you start writing a blog and you put something online, I don't know if you guys know this, but people on the internet can be very direct. right? Like you get very, very unfiltered, very, very candid feedback. And as I was writing, people would give me very direct, candid feedback. They weren't sugarcoating it. They weren't going, yeah, whatever you come up with is awesome. Now, it's not to say that everyone's a dick. There's certainly an aspect of that, and we're going to see some of that soon, believe me. But it was just good organic feedback from a much broader spectrum of people than what I could ever get in my normal job at work. I want to give you an example of sort of some of the things I was writing and how it helped. So back in 2010, I wrote a 5-part series on TeamCity, Subversion Web Deploy. Nothing to do with security. And the reason why I wrote this was that I was rolling this out in Pfizer. So this was part of sort of my domain, my responsibilities. I wanted to integrate it into CI and actually have a proper process. We didn't have a good CI process. I'd never used TeamCity before. I honestly had no idea what I was doing. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll write the blog, because if I write the blog, first of all, I'm going to really try and get things right, because I know what people are like if you get anything wrong. So I'm going to put a lot more focus into getting it right. And this might seem weird, but I put a lot more effort into it than if I had just done it with only an internal audience. I think part of it as well was I wanted other people to use this. I wanted to create something they could take away and do good things with. So I had to get the facts right. So I wrote this series, and not only did I put a lot more effort into it, but other people who knew more about it than me left me good comments. And this was cool because you're not the smartest person in the room anymore. There's lots of other people out there that know this much better than you. And this sort of became one of the things that I had a reputation for at the time. It's a bit of time's passed now. But it allowed me to carve out a bit of a niche too. Like Troy, okay, he's the guy that understands how to do this stuff. So it was serving multiple purposes. It was a really good thing to have done. Another good example along those lines is things like this. So we were migrating a lot of apps from sort of traditional hosting into Azure. Now, I think from memory it was about 80 websites. I was like, well, we keep doing the same thing over and over again. Let's automate it. We'll do a bit of PowerShell, run some commands, and that will create the web app in Azure. It will create the database. It will create the accounts. It will join everything up. Like the magic will happen. I'm going to turn this all into a massive PowerShell script. And I wrote this blog post. And I wrote it whilst I was doing my job, whilst I was in the office, on the company time. And I have no qualms whatsoever about having done that, because that helped me do that job so much better than if I hadn't. Because again, all the same things as like TeamCity, like I had to give it a lot of focus, I had to get it right, other people chimed in and gave me feedback. This thing worked really, really well. It's a fantastic piece of work. And I still look back at it today as well. Many of the blog posts I write, incidentally, aren't necessarily for you. They're so that I can remember what the hell I've done when I come back to it later on. And in fact, when I eventually left the organisation, my handover process, my documentation for things like TeamCity was www.troyhunt.com/. There it is, there's all the docs. And there's some passwords over here. So it actually served multiple purposes. And one of the things I found in doing all of this is that when you work and you publish things publicly and you do the whole community thing and you get all the feedback, it starts to give you a lot more opportunity to leverage things. So a lot of the time now people go, oh, you know, you seem to be very busy and you do a lot, how do you do all this stuff? Often you're seeing the same thing, it's just multiplied over multiple times. You know, maybe it's in the news here and then someone else is talking about it there and referencing it there. It's the same thing, it's the same unit of work. It's just been applied over and over again. So think about that as well, like how can I leverage that effort? Because if I had just sat in Pfizer and built out that Azure PowerShell script and it had just done that one thing, it would have been a waste. You know, doing it the way I did, many people used it and I got profile and it contributed towards things like MVP awards. It made a lot of sense. Now, getting onto the blogging side of things. If you are thinking about doing a blog, I reckon the fastest, most effective way you can get into it today is to go and get Ghost. Anyone use Ghost here? You like it? Yes, very good. Okay, so Ghost is a really, really neat blogging platform. Things like WordPress tend to get very clunky. They've got lots of other things. It does a gazillion things that you don't need. Ghost is nice because it does blogs. You know, that's the focus. And more than just Ghost, go and get Ghost Pro. It costs 62 cents a day, about $19 a month. Because Ghost Pros manage Ghost, so you pay them, they host it, they patch it, they upgrade it, they give it love and care, and they take care of it all. And all you do then is you focus on writing things. Now, because we are in the era where you have to have HTTPS, apparently, this is what they tell me, go and get Cloudflare as well. And you can get Cloudflare for free. And you wrap Cloudflare around Ghost, and not only do you get HTTPS and certificates and padlocks and things, you get all of this caching all the way around the world, and it stops threats and all sorts of wonderful things. So this is great. 62 cents a day, if you're going to go down this path, is a pretty good investment. Probably pre-tax dollars as well, incidentally. If you don't want to start blogging, I don't reckon you have to know what to blog about. You know, like you don't have to have a plan. For me, that first blog post I showed you before, it was just like, well, this kind of seems like a good place to start. But then I go through and look at the next blog post I created. This was the second one. It's around Subversion. We're doing a lot of Subversion back then. Did a bit here around Visual Studio 2010. Again, it's all this sort of late 2009 era. This one, on retrospect, I wouldn't necessarily recommend as being a productive way of being a better programmer. It is a long-term commitment. But, you know, the point was, it's like, it was something on my mind, let's just write it. And as I started writing, I started to focus a little bit more. Started writing about things like software quality. This was my first smackdown of another company. Interesting. Fun times. PDC 09, this was a professional developers conference. I didn't get to go. I just read all these different news pieces about it and thought I could write something that consolidated this and put it in one place. And every single one of these has got nothing to do with security, which is the thing that I'm known for now. But it was a starting point, right? It's like, let me start writing something. Let me sort of start this kind of divergence phase of just throwing ideas, and we'll see where it starts to focus. You don't have to just write on your own blog as well. So there are plenty of places out there that are happy for you to write. So I was writing for Redgate, for example. You don't get paid for this, but it gets your name somewhere else. It gives you a chance to write something, to publish something, to get a little bit more exposure. And again, nothing to do with security. Also nothing to do with security. Kind of related to security. Don't use shared development databases. All of this, again, was just getting things out there and getting exposure. Now, sometimes people say, well, I'm a little bit worried that if I do this, my boss is going to come to me one day and he's going to be worried. What if you do get good? Like, what if you become a better person from your blogging and you leave? If your boss is worried about this is a serious problem. Like, honestly, if your boss is worried that, hey, someone working for me may get even better at what I'm paying them to do, that's a sign. Like, you do not want to be there if that's where you're at with your boss. That is not a productive environment to be in. And it might sound a little bit funny, but I've heard that multiple times over. It is just a ridiculous proposition. So the blogging is good. There are loads of opportunities to speak at events as well. So the very first talk I ever did was this one here. And this was at a company called SSW, and it was a user group talk. And it was walking distance from home. It was like literally a few minutes walk, just around the corner. And it was a very, very casual talk. And that was sort of the first thing. And then I did things that were a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And then 6 weeks ago, I sat in front of US Congress in Washington, DC, which was a lot bigger than a little user group talk. And I was actually looking at this, I was putting a slide together the other day going, man, those other guys look so serious, don't they? And I'm sitting there with these funny socks. I actually went and got special socks to go and speak in Congress with that looked like this because I didn't want to be too serious about the whole damn thing. And the thing that, on retrospect, again, really strikes me is how this was only a result of that little talk to begin with. And we just kept chipping away and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, for all of you guys, if you do want to speak at an event, there are lots of events around that you can go and submit talks to. So, for example, right now, you can submit to NDC in Oslo. Who's been to NDC Oslo? Right, it's like this, but everything's like multiplied over several times. It is an epic event. It's probably still one of my favourite annual events. So if you want to go and speak at an event like that, go and submit a paper. You don't have to have something that you're the world's expert on. You just have to have something that's going to be interesting to other people. So events like that are great. There's a lot of user groups around as well. So I still speak at a lot of user groups. This was in Copenhagen recently. And you know, you go along there and it's a pretty casual event. It's a lot more casual than this. And I sort of spoke for an hour and then I sat there and just answered questions for an hour or so. And one of the things that actually struck me when I did this event is I sort of did the talk, sat around, and then we hung around with a few people and drank beer for, I can't quite remember how long. And I remember people saying, this is so cool, it's like you're normal, you just hung around and drank beer. I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I hang around and drink beer? Who doesn't want to do that? And someone said, look, we've had other notable people come along and all they wanted to do is go talk, bang out the door, and then they get into their executive jet or whatever and they disappear. So I reckon doing stuff like this is really cool, and anyone at any level can do it. Like, you will have user groups around you that you can get involved in. Another one you can get involved in is stuff like this. Everyone knows these guys? Hey, things like podcasts, right? .NET Rocks is a massive one. Okay, so that is a great podcast. There are lots of other little podcasts around as well. Things like Dane and Payne. It's run by a mate of mine called Lars Clint. If you want to talk on a podcast, let me know. I'll put you in touch with Lars. We'll get you on a podcast. It's a little thing, but it's just like that one little step towards what could be a much bigger thing in the future. So stuff like this is cool. It's exposure again. Stack Overflow is another awesome one. And what I really like about Stack Overflow is again, it's one of these things that gives you this sort of history of what I've done over time. When I was interviewing people, if I could have found someone on Stack Overflow, and not necessarily have like John's Geek kind of profile, right? But just have something where I can see that this person was actually asking questions about .NET 5 years ago and they said they'd started it. Or answering questions, or just doing something. And it's so simple. And my profile isn't particularly fantastic. I haven't answered or asked a question in years. But for a while there, it was something that I did, and that helped sort of build up that profile again. So that's cool. Projects, personal projects are another good one. So this is one that I started some years ago now. Automated security analyzer for ASP.NET websites. And frankly, this has kind of gone a bit unloved lately because I've been busy with other things. But it was an opportunity to build something, put it out there. A bunch of people used it. And to that point about leverage, they said, this is Troy. Troy's that guy who starts to know a little bit about security stuff, builds the reputation, helps with the MVP things, that kind of stuff. Much of the reason why I don't do anything with this one anymore is because I do a lot with this one. Now, this one I know most people know. I asked yesterday, I was like, half the audience had used it and been pwned. Not my fault, I'm sorry. And the really interesting thing about this is that this is literally something I built in spare time. In fact, the first version of this I built was when I was with Pfizer. I was on a plane on the way to the Philippines. I thought, hey, this would be a good idea. And I had downtime in the hotel there, and I found the Adobe data breach and a few others, loaded it in. I thought, a few of my mates will look at this. Today, about 100,000 people a day use it. 1.8 million subscribers. Sometimes it has up to 3 million visitors in a day. And it's a hobby project I built at home on Azure. And all of you have access to these technologies. So all of this stuff sort of just moves you in that direction of having more exposure and more profile. And it's not that I did it to try and get that. It's not like, hey, let's just do this so that you can become a big name or something. It's because it was good fun, and it really helped me a lot doing what I was doing at work as well. A lot of the reason I was doing this, in fact, I always tell people, half the reason I did Have I Been Pwned was I wanted a data breach notification service. The other half was that I wanted to learn about Azure, because I was starting to do a lot of Azure at work. So all of this stuff so far has been very positive. Where things start to take an interesting turn is here. What I've found over time is you start to see, as you get more and more stuff out there, is sort of little cultural nuances about the things that people might be tolerant of, and then the things that surprise you about the way people react, about things you never would have thought of. I'm going to play you a 5-second video clip here I got some feedback on after a conference.
You may not know it, but you've probably already been hacked. Thousands of hacking attacks occur each day.
You know, I play this and we go, how do we know he's a hacker? He's got a hoodie and there's a green screen. Ha ha ha, everyone loves it. And I showed this around the world. I probably did 20 different talks with this clip on it. And I thought it was always funny. People always loved it. Job well done. And then one day I did this talk, and it was actually in Brisbane, so it was very, very close to home. And a bloke came up to me after the talk, and he said it was something that he felt he needed to talk to me about. And I was kind of curious about it. I thought, okay, normally people come up and say, hey, great talk. I was like, cool, someone who liked it. And he says, you know, it was a good talk, but there was something about the hacker. And he was kind of awkward about it, like he didn't want to sort of spit it out. And I'm like, okay, well, what have I done wrong? Oh, it went too fast. Let's try that again. What have I done wrong? So the hacker's black. And I had to turn around. I went, shit, was he? Oh, yeah, he was. Now what? Now, what I didn't realise at the time, well, I sort of penny didn't drop at the time, was the bloke was American. And he was very conscious of the stereotype of race and crime. And I was showing a bloke hacking someone who was black. And this made him concerned that maybe it was perpetuating a negative stereotype. And I sort of thought about it later on and went, well, hang on a second. When I did this talk, there was this guy in there, he was a hacker. There was this guy as a hacker. This guy was a hacker. This guy was a hacker. This one was also a hacker. A true story. This is actually a news article about Russian hackers, and this is apparently what a Russian hacker looks like. And the penny that dropped for me was not necessarily that I had done the wrong thing, but that I had put something out there which was facing the world, and there was a cultural tolerance which was inconsistent with what we normally had in Australia. And it's still the only person who's ever come up and said, hey, maybe you should sort of think about this. And I still do the same talk as well, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. But I just thought that was interesting, that there are these tolerances that can be very different, and when you put yourself out there on sort of a global platform, you're going to get different views. Another similar example is I wrote a blog post that I put a lot of work into about secure password reset features. And a lot of the sort of premise of this was things like, when you allow someone to do a password reset, you want to avoid enumeration risks. So an enumeration risk would be where you put an email address into the password reset form and then it comes back and says, yes, the account exists, or no, it doesn't, because that would tell you who has an account and who does not. And I wanted to try and make the point that enumeration is more of a problem on some classes of websites than others. So I put this image in. I cropped this very, very carefully to ensure that there was nothing in there which you wouldn't see if you went to any beach in Australia. In Australia, it's warm enough to take your top... Anyway. So I was very, very careful of it. I was conscious of it. And the red bit here, there is no user registered at this address. And the whole point was, on something like an adult website, there would be a greater expectation of privacy because there's a social stigma. And I had several people contact me and say, I had this on my screen. If my boss had to walk past and seen this, I would have been in so much trouble. And I'm going, hang on, mate, like this is like one little image out of thousands of words worth of blog post. You know, like let's not lose context here. But it upset people in a way that I hadn't anticipated. So I ended up changing the blog post. I put a little warning up the top and said, incidentally, before you scroll down, further down the screen, there is going to be a cropped image, nothing you won't see at the beach, but if that may offend you, click here and it will be replaced by a photo of fluffy bunnies. The fluffy bunnies are not wearing any clothes. Trust me, it's there. You can go and check the post. So I did not see that coming. One that with the benefit of hindsight, I probably should have seen coming is when I wrote about Cloudflare. And this was in about the middle of 2016. And this was about a 5,000-word blog post. This was a really big one that I thought made a lot of really insightful points. As part of this blog post, I wrote one sentence, which when you see it now, you'll probably see, you'll sort of go, okay, well, I could see where someone might get upset. I said, I'd like to solve world hunger, poverty, and get rid of Trump, but none of those things are going to happen in one go. Okay, maybe Trump. Which I think most of us would say is a perfectly reasonable thing. Any Americans? Good. Anyway, after this 5,000-word blog post, which took me many, many hours to write. Some of these blog posts will take a day or two, a total effort. They'll happen over weeks. A lot of work goes into them, and then they go up there for free. And I had feedback. And someone said, there was no kind of, nice blog post, thank you, this is really useful. It was like, don't talk about Trump or Hillary. Please refrain from bringing it up here. And someone else chimed in. It can take years to earn a great reputation, seconds to lose it. It's an off-colour remark about Trump or Clinton. And then this person said, a small part of me died today. This is real. The comment's still there. The sentence about Trump is still there as well. And the reason the sentence about Trump is still there is that the thing that really dawned on me is that sometimes it's okay if someone gets upset. If everyone gets upset, not so good. But sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. I've got a little clip from an Aussie comedian called Steve Hughes, and he explains this beautifully.
And political correctness is the oppression of our intellectual movement, so no one says anything anymore in case somebody else gets offended. What happens if you say that and someone gets offended? Well, they can be offended. What's wrong with being offended? When did sticks and stones may break my bones stop being relevant? Isn't that what you teach children, for God's sake? That's what you teach toddlers. He called me an idiot. Don't worry about him. He's a dick. Now you have adults going, I was offended, and I have rights. Well, so what? Be offended. Nothing happens. You're an adult. Grow up. Deal with it. I was offended. I don't care. Nothing happens when you're offended. There's nothing. I went to the comedy show, and the comedian said something about the Lord, and I was offended. And when I woke up in the morning, I had leprosy.
Because it's true, right? And again, it's not that I want to go out and upset everyone. Like, this is not the goal. And I think you've got to have a little bit of a moral compass which knows when you're crossing that line. But the penny that really sort of dropped, the thing that dawned on me, was that if I wasn't upsetting someone, I really wasn't trying hard enough. You know, like, you will become so bland and so boring. And I think all of us like to see that there's a little bit of personality in the things that we're reading and the people that you see speaking here. If it's bland and vanilla and boring, honestly, like, it's just, I don't know why they bother. So I'm getting increasingly comfortable with the fact that when you put things online, there will be people out there who will get upset. Some of them admittedly get more upset than others. I had someone a little while back decide to create a WordPress blog all about how much I suck. The entire blog was literally troyhuntsucks.wordpress.com. And he wrote many blog posts about how much I suck. And I'm actually a little bit disappointed that it has since been deleted and I couldn't find it on archive.org. He put a lot of genuine work into this. His Discuss account about how much I suck still exists. That's still there. There is literally a Discuss account all about how much I suck. And I kept seeing this. I'd see the WordPress blog and I'd see the Discuss account, all these things about how much I suck. And I thought, I've got to hit this on the front foot. I have to go and register a domain to establish how much I no longer suck. This is out there. Served over HTTPS. Now, you know how I said the thing about leverage, right? Like, when you do something, multiply it over and over and over again. When I did this, I was conscious that something happens every single time I register a domain. I have a philosophical disagreement with paying $3 a year for who is privacy, you know, where you've got to pay money so that you're not in the directory and it becomes like a big phone book. So what happens as a result is every time I register a domain, I get calls from India trying to sell me web development services. And I thought, this is going to be good. I'm going to record when these people call me up and see how many times I can get them to say Troy Hunt sucks.
TroyHuntSucks.com. T-R-O-Y, Troy Hunt, H-U-N-T, Hunt Sucks, S-U-C-K-S.com. TroyHuntSucks.com. T-R-O-Y, Troy. That's Hunt, H-U-N-T, Hunt.
Gotcha.
That's Sucks, S-U-C-K-S.com.
Right.
Troy Hunt.
Yeah.
That's Sucks, S-U-C-K-S. Troy, T-R-O-Y, Troy. H-U-N-T, and Hunt, that's your name, Troy Hunt. And then Sucks, that's S-U-C-K-S, Sucks.
There are actually more than that, and I just edited out the best ones. But I just found that amusing and I shared it, and a lot of people online thought it was very funny. Recently, in fact, since I did this talk, I registered, never going to give you up, never going to let you go. I have a lot of recordings. Because it's fun, right? And it's like I felt a little bit better about registering domains then. But, you know, the thing about abuse online is that the stuff before is kind of mild, but sometimes it can actually get really serious. And, you know, this is something that, until I started doing this talk, I didn't really share publicly because I didn't want to make the situation worse. And we can kind of go two different ways here. Who wants the censored version? Who wants the uncensored version? That's good, because I've only got an uncensored one. I'm going to share a piece of feedback I got a few years ago that really did upset me. And I think you'll see why. Now, I sat on this for years. I have a special folder for abuse. I got some great stuff in there. Feel free to take a photo. And I would bring this out every now and then, normally when I was with mates drinking beer, and we'd all just get pissed and laugh at it because it's kind of funny. And I've brought it out again recently because I just think it's interesting now to look back at just how vitriolic some people can be. And let's be fair as well, this is nothing compared to what some other people get, particularly when you see what some women get in a sustained fashion. So as much as this upset me, it's certainly much worse for other people in some circumstances. But, I wanted to share it just to sort of give you a sense of what can happen. And honestly, stuff like this today really doesn't worry me. It's like mute, block, move on, job done. To be honest, most of the interactions I have online are absolutely awesome, and a lot of that is due to Twitter. So I thought I'd share a few things here because I think the way we use social media and we connect with random strangers can actually be really awesome for our careers and the things we do in our daily lives. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed, especially when I come to events like this and I travel, is the number of people I meet who say, I want to take selfies. And trust me, I find this weird, not in a like I wish you wouldn't do it weird kind of way, but it's like, this is awesome, they want to take a photo with me. I say to my wife, it's like, I'm famous now, don't you? She's like, yeah, on the internet. Thank you for bringing me back down to earth. But this is cool, and I've met all of these people all the way around the world who just want to catch up and say, hey, look, this is awesome stuff. And to be honest, every single physical encounter I have ever had with anyone, bar none, after meeting them on the internet has been awesome. And the stuff like the abuse before is someone sitting in a hoodie in a dungeon who never wants to come out and see the light of day. You never see them. No one has ever come up to me face to face and said anything even close to that. Might be interesting if they did. So, look, a really good example is often when I travel to places, I'll say, look, I'm going to be in Antwerp, for example. Does some random person I've never met before want to go and grab a coffee or something? And when I went to Antwerp, this was earlier last year, I had a couple of people actually say yes. And I met one bloke at the train station when I had a coffee. I'd never met him before. He was a very nice guy. And I had another bloke, this one down in the corner, a guy called Stein. He's like, I'll show you around. And he took me under the tunnel, under the river, and showed me a few different spots that I probably wouldn't have found otherwise. He worked in security. We had a few good chats about that. And then he said, I want to give you some of the world's best beer. And I was like, yeah, everyone says that about their beer. And he's like, no, here, have two. And I looked at that when I got home, and this is the Westvleteren 12. And it's like, it is constantly rated as the world's best beer. You know this, right? Because you're Belgian. So it is epically good. There's not as much left anymore, but it was really, really good. And this was just, again, sort of one of these chance encounters where every time I've done this, I've had really positive experiences. When I was here last year, actually, someone said, catch up, I'll show you around Westminster Abbey. I asked the same question, just over here. And when I turned up, I was like, this kid's like 17. I'm like, okay, fine, are you sure? And he turned up and he had his teacher with him as well, his science teacher. And they showed Lars Klint and myself around Westminster Abbey and showed us where they did all the robotics and everything. We just had this epically cool time just because I'd said, look, we're going to turn up in some random place and someone was watching, and we had a very nice experience from it. So honestly, the online encounters are really positive, and I don't want to sort of put a negative bent on that by showing you some of the abuse stuff. Another thing that I find tends to happen on social media comes after posting stuff like this. So we got a new car last year, and the engine sounds epic. And I took a little video of it, and I put it online. I was like, I love the sound of this engine. It's great V8. And someone popped up and said they weren't real happy with that. And I see this every now and then. Some of you might have seen me, it's probably 2 weeks ago. Someone said a similar thing. It's like, I follow you for security stuff. Could you please not talk about anything else? It's my timeline, dude. What are you talking about? And the funny thing about this is right after that, someone else chimed in. And this is the thing, like you're going to be polarising to some degree. And frankly, if the first bloke didn't like it, well, okay, now what? It's like you didn't like it. I'm going to tweet a bunch of other stuff you will like. And I made the comment a couple of weeks ago, it's like, if you don't like beer and beaches, you probably want to stop unfollow me right now, because there'll be mostly security stuff and then there'll be a few other things that are actually a bit of my personality. Another one sort of taught me an interesting lesson. I got a new laptop. I got one of these Yoga 910s. And when I got the laptop, I thought, this is just my own curiosity, I thought, with a brand new machine, how much data does it need to suck down from the internet just to update all the service packs and patches and everything? So I plugged it in and I had a look, and in total it pulled down 12 gig of data. And I thought, holy shit, 12 gig, like that's really interesting. Maybe other people will find this interesting as well. So I created this tweet. And in brackets at the end I said, stats via UBNT, which is Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti make networking products. And I'd written a bit of stuff about Ubiquiti before. The reason I said stats via UBNT here is because if I didn't say that, people would have said, where do you get your stats from? And so I will head them off at the pass. I will put all the information there already. And someone didn't like that. And I'm sort of looking at going, mate, it's 3 words. It's not even what the post is about. And there was a little bit of me that kind of went, this would be a time where it's perfectly reasonable to say, you're a dickhead, move on. You know, because that's the way I was feeling at the time. You know, it was frustrating. It's like, why be aggressive about this? And I thought, no, look, we'll try this differently. So I went back to him and said, that's fine. You know, maybe it's not relevant to you. Maybe you should filter it out. And just so he knew I wasn't trying to be a little bit facetious or anything like that, I put a smiley face. And then the guy responded. And I felt really, really good about myself. I was like, oh, I handled that well, didn't I? You know, this is cool. But the thing that sort of struck me about this, and the lesson I wanted to impart from it, is that one of the great things about social media is it's your opportunity to demonstrate your character. And when I think back to those times where I was doing the interviews and I was trying to figure out who is this person that wants to come and work for us and spend 40 hours a week in the office, how can I figure out what sort of person they are? Now, I would hope that if someone went to my social media profile and saw the way I responded, they go, well, you handled that well. You know, that was pretty reasonable. But have a think about some of the profiles you see online. Have a think about the way some people react. And imagine you were going to be employing them and you read some of the things they say. It could so easily go either way. And I also want to be clear that this is not about like, why don't you fabricate this persona, and if you fabricate it just right, you'll look awesome and people will hire you even though you're a dick, ha ha ha. Like, that's not it, right? It's that you need to be organic and honest and all the rest of it. And if you can, and it's a positive thing, well then that's going to work very, very well for you. So, moving forward, as I sort of start to get to the exit from Pfizer and the exit from corporate life, there was one thing that was increasingly happening. It was this. And I suspect many of you have been through this before. So most of us, particularly in Western countries, have had these phases where the company has said, we're going to start sending work, not just outsourcing, but usually offshoring as well. And the premise Pfizer had is they said, look, we got a bunch of people in the organisation like this. They make us money. We've also got a bunch of people in the organisation like all of us here. They cost us money. You're an expense. And I'm sure many of you have heard this before because you've probably been in the same outsourcing sort of thing. And that is a very sort of demeaning experience where all the indicators are saying, look, what you do is not valuable enough. And I'd see this over and over again in so many different things the organisation did. So, for example, the Christmas party would come up and they'd send the sales reps here. This is Hamilton Island. Incidentally, this is where you sent all the bad guys 200 years ago. Good luck with that. Thank you. Send them places like this. And it's very, very nice here. Now, the tech folks got to go to the local bowls club. We got a $20 a head budget, which was enough to buy about 3 beers. I think we got the bowling for free. I don't know, actually, because I remember seeing that and going, this is bullshit. And I ended up going to a conference dinner instead. And this was sort of the constant attitude of the organisation. You know, technology wasn't valued. I was in a place where the very thing that I'd invested my entire life in was just not an important thing to the organisation. And then around about 2014, it was about March 2014, I got a new boss, and this boss was in the Philippines. I'd had the same boss for about 13 years before that. New boss in the Philippines. And the Philippines is a very hierarchical sort of society. Like every time I went to the Philippines, they'd be like, "Hi, Sir Troy, welcome, Sir Troy." And I'd be like, "Really? That's just rather awkward." But that is the way the culture there is. And I don't know if he wanted me to call him Sir Gerard or not. I do know it was never going to happen. But clearly there was a different set of social tolerances. And very early on, in fact, before I started reporting to him, I said, I'm going to go and speak at Code Mania in New Zealand. Awesome conference, Code Mania. And I'm going to be going there, I'm going to be doing my talk. These are the dates. Everyone's cool, sweet, happy. And then he says, I'd like you to come to the Philippines to go to a meeting. And at the same time, it's Code Mania. And I said, well, I can't, I'm going to Code Mania. And he said, no, I'd really like you to go. I said, look, I'm going to Code Mania, and I was actually taking my wife. We're going to have a holiday afterwards. And he came back and he said, only priority is the company. There's the literal words in the email. Still have the email. I have the evidence. And this was sort of on the back of all the other stuff, right? It's like the outsourcing, and then they're going to the Bowls Club and not the Hamilton Island and everything. And just the clear intent that technology was not valuable. And the very things that I stood for weren't important. And every day I'd go into work, and it was feeling like this. Just let that sink in for a moment. And I decided that things had to change. I did go to the Philippines, and I went for most of the meeting, and I left very late, got flights delayed, got into Auckland like 10 minutes before I was meant to come on stage and do a closing keynote, and it just stressed the hell out of me. So my wife and I came back from holiday and said, look, we got to get out of here. Like I'm just done. I've got to go. And what I decided to do is every single opportunity that came up to do pretty much anything, I'd just say yes to. So who's seen Yes Man with Jim Carrey? All right, so this is a movie where he just starts saying yes to all this crazy shit, and then all this amazing stuff happens as a result. And this is what I felt like, and I remember really, really clearly in that phase feeling exactly like Jim Carrey from this movie, because I was just going yes to everything, and it was nuts because it was absolutely non-stop. But I was just doing a huge amount of blogging and speaking and whatever else I could possibly do whilst also doing my job. One of the things I was saying yes to a lot was Pluralsight. So every chance I got to write courses, I'd be doing it. And some of you may know, but the way Pluralsight works for authors is it's royalty-based. So you create a course, it's all very carefully managed and curated and peer-reviewed and everything. You put it up online, and then when you guys watch it, we get tiny fractions of money. And if enough of you watch it, they become big fractions. And I went so hard on Pluralsight that by the end of 2014, I was making more money from Pluralsight than Pfizer. It's like, this is good. This is nice. Like, now I can leave the job. Except the problem was I could leave the job, but now I'd lose half my money because you readjust to more money very, very easily. And the other thing is, my boss hadn't really spoken to me for about 7 months as well after that incident. Literally just wasn't talking to me anymore, which suited me quite well because after nearly 14 years, it's like you got enough stuff to keep yourself amused, right? I'm busy, I've got jobs to do. So in a way, it was kind of like, I got to get out of here, but the pressure is off just a little bit. You know, what I really need is a bit of a push to make me go. And then the push came just after Christmas, early 2015. Came back and there's an invite, a meeting invite, and just said updates. And you're looking at the attendees, you know, that is a really interesting, why would all these people be in the same? Oh, interesting. And I went to the meeting, and one of the ladies there, she was the most senior person in the room, she was crying, so well, this is getting a lot more interesting very quickly right now. And on the projector, now my boss was on the phone, he was in the Philippines somewhere, his boss was on the phone, no HR or anything like that, that would have, for some reason they weren't there. And they said, here's the org chart now. And I think there were around about 11 of us in the room, actually, in total. And then they said, here's the org chart in the future. And looking at it going, that one has names. And then that other one doesn't have any names, and it's got less boxes. You know, like, where are we going with this? And you know, like, the insinuation was clear, but no one was saying it. And I remember really clearly saying, can we just cut the bullshit and you make it clear? Are you making roles redundant? Well, maybe you could apply for this job in Singapore. No, look, I'm quite okay if you are. But, you know, what's going to happen? And eventually that is what happened. They said, okay, a bunch of roles are gone. In fact, they got rid of 4 different roles. Mine was one of them. It was all people who were in Australia, which, like the UK, on the global market is an expensive place, but looking after Asia, which is a cheap place. So it kind of made sense. But it was better than being fired. And the interesting thing is, there were people in the room who had never planned for this, who had never been ready for this, and they were quite upset. And the thing that was happening for me is that, like, the penny was starting to drop. I was going, hang on a second, redundancy. Redundancies are normally good things. Redundancy is not something that you cry about now, is it? And when it all boiled down, in order to have a redundancy, they gave me nearly 2 years' worth of pay. Walk out the door. It's like, here you go. So, whoa. So when I was pissed off like 6 months ago, if I had walked out, I would have had a small fraction of that. And now you're saying, go. Not only that, but this happened in January. It was just after Christmas. And they said, you know, you've got a few months. So I had until April. So I went absolutely nuts on Pluralsight until it was double Pfizer. And I just hammered away at Pluralsight, hammering away. And the only reason all the Pluralsight stuff was getting the royalties was because of all the other things that I did with the blogs and the speaking and everything else. And then eventually, in the middle of April in 2015, it was the last day, and I left Pfizer. My wife and I had a little celebration afterwards. I don't remember much about that night. This is the only remaining evidence, drinking Krug straight out of the bottle. It must have been a good night. Actually, it was that, and it was also Belgian beer as well. That was part of my celebration. And that's kind of the way it all wrapped up. So since that time, since April 2015, it has all been independence. And the things that I've spoken about up until this point were all the things that I then leveraged in order to do what I do now. So now life is often travelling around to places like here. And in fact, in this shot, this is Copenhagen. And it was in October before last. And the reason why I took this photo, which, you know, when you compare this back to the beach with the wallaby and the sort of life I was used to, is a rather different part of the world. And I was here on the other side of the world, and this is how I spent my son's birthday. So he was turning 7 just then from memory, and it was like, okay, FaceTime, you know. I'm on the absolute wrong side of the world. I can't be with my family. And the thing that sort of got me thinking about, and this is something that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, is the price that we're all willing to put on our families. And people don't like hearing this because they go, well, my family's priceless. But you're all here, not with your families, because we choose to make these sacrifices. We don't go to the office every day because everything is awesome and we'd rather be there instead of with our husbands or wives or children. We do it because it's a necessity. And we make this choice the whole way along. And I made a lot of choices to make a lot of sacrifices in evenings and weekends and holidays. For years, it was like literally spending as much spare time as possible and trying to balance that with family, but wanting to do the Pluralsight things and everything else. But now what it means is everything sort of balances out. So, yeah, very often I play a lot of tennis with the family, and I can be down here first thing in the morning with my son, having a hit of tennis, not being worried about the time that I've got to get into the office or being on the clock or having to deliver something. So it's swings and roundabouts, right? It kind of balances out. But probably the last thing on this, which I think is really important, is that I've had a huge amount of support from my wife as well. So this is Kylie. Some of you know Kylie. And all of these things we do, including me being here now, is something that we talk about. And we go, well, what should we do? You know, we've got these things coming up. If I go here, I'm going to be away for 2 weeks. We've got to go to Oslo and Denmark next week as well. You know, should I do that? Does it make sense? You know? And very often this is long play stuff too. Like going to Congress the other day, I really wanted to stay home and sit in the sun. It was getting warm. It was nice. I didn't particularly want to go to the other side of the world, and I got nothing for it. They don't pay you, but it's the long play. And we had this discussion and went, this is actually kind of really awesome for our careers collectively, because we both move forward when I do things like this. And, you know, I think that sort of the last thing I'd add to that, and this is really relevant for all of you, no matter what stage you're at, is that you've got to have a shared vision. So if you have a partner and you're sort of planning how we're going to split our time, how we're going to prioritise, you've got to be on the same wavelength. And the people I see around me who aren't on that same wavelength have a hell of a struggle at whatever level it is that they're living life. So on that final note, thank you very much. I've got about 5 minutes worth of time I saved for questions. Does anyone have any questions? How did I get fired? How do you get fired? Does anyone have any suggestions about how to get fired? I think getting fired would probably be like the easiest thing in the world. I can think of a lot of ways. I don't know that it would be a good career move. So there's that. Redundancies are also, I never know anyone, and maybe there are people in this room who have had different experiences, never known anyone who's had a redundancy and not been really happy. So Kylie had a redundancy from her work as well, so she was very happy with that. The other people who were in the room with me when the redundancies were handed out, some of them looked really stressed, but 2 of the people did much better out of it than me because they were over 50, so they got a much higher payout. One of the blokes didn't do as well. He went out and got another job straight away, no problem. So, you know, the people who had sort of the skills to back up what it was they were doing, no problems at all. And when you get a redundancy, you get a big buffer. Because I was thinking, like, I'm going to go and be independent now, and I don't know where the money is going to go. Like, I know Pluralsight will do well, but that could drop off. I don't know what's going to happen. But the redundancy gives you so much buffer anyway. And even if it's only 3 months, 3 months is still a lot of buffer too. Yes? Was it scary to go freelance? I think it would have been scary if it had happened 2 years earlier, even 1 year earlier. It wasn't scary by then, primarily because a combination of the Pfizer redundancy and the Pluralsight royalties meant that I didn't have to worry about money. So I wasn't going to stress about that. I think it would be very scary with the wife, and I've got 2 little kids as well. I could easily see how I'd be stressed.
I also want to work on my international career as speaker. And my decision is if I write in English, the Belgian people, not each Belgian people can understand it, but if I write in Dutch, it's not good for my speaker career.
Yeah. So the question here was the gentleman was saying he specialises in software for disability, was that correct? But is also wanting to have a speaker career, because you're a speaker as well, obviously. And he's like, should I write in Dutch for my local audience on my sort of disability front, or write in English for the international audience? Look, you know, first of all, when you started talking about the thing with the Dutch and the disability, I almost thought maybe this is a place where you become the guy, right? Like maybe you are the guy who does disability in the Netherlands. And I know that is a small slice of the world, but maybe that's a niche. But it does sound like a very, very different audience to the broader sort of international group. Maybe you just need 2 blogs. Maybe you need 2 Twitter accounts, you know? Maybe you just split that up, because I think you risk polarising people. Because you saw in the slide there, like, there was a guy who really didn't like my car, you know, and he was getting upset about that. It's so easy to polarise people just with 1 or 2 things that don't fit what they expect to see from you. So maybe multiple accounts. Yep. So what do I recommend to what, sorry? All right. So how do I promote, or how should you promote your blog? So, yeah, the thing to remember is that when I started that blog, I would have had, I think, in the hundreds of followers. On Twitter, I don't know if it would have been thousands. And what ended up happening is it just took a lot of time with very organic growth before people saw stuff, got interested, start following me on Twitter. So to be honest, pretty much forever and a day, the only way I've ever sort of gotten my blog out there is I tweet it, I put it on Facebook, I use if this then that. Anyone use that? IFTT.com, where you can look at an XML feed, you can take that and automatically publish it to, say, LinkedIn, you know, stuff like that. So I get things to publish wherever I possibly can, and then some people see it. And then over time, your networks grow and people share it. And it took years and years and years for me to get any sort of traction. You know, I mean, people people sort of forget how recent a lot of that was. It has only been 2.5 years since I've had independence, and it was probably 5 or 6 years before anyone really paid any attention. Yes? All right, so the question is, while I was employed, how much time did I devote to blogging, Pluralsight courses, etc.? So one of the things that makes that slightly difficult to answer is that, as when I was talking about the Azure and the PowerShell stuff, I tried to do as much as I could for Pfizer, which was also stuff that I could use for my blog and for my courses. I mean, I did a Pluralsight course on a whole bunch of Azure PaaS stuff. Now, I wrote that course whilst I was at Pfizer doing Azure PaaS and learning that. So I leveraged it and I multiplied it. If I had to sort of hazard a guess, maybe I averaged like an hour a night and maybe 3 hours a day on the weekend or something, which seems like quite a bit. But look, it ebbs and flows, right? But I think that the most important thing, and we probably should call it here, most important thing about all of that is to leverage it. So, try and take what you're already doing and apply it to that, rather than having to almost sort of sequentially use your time. It was almost like my mind was just going async as much as possible. Work smart, not hard. Excellent note to end on. Thanks very much, everyone.